Volume 2, Chapter 8 of The Last Man. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Madeira. The Last Man by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Volume 2, Chapter 8. After a long interval, I am again impelled by the restless spirit within me to continue my narration. But I must alter the mode which I have hitherto adopted. The details contained in the foregoing pages, apparently trivial, yet each slightest one weighing like lead in the depressed scale of human afflictions. This tedious dwelling on the sorrows of others, while my own were only in apprehension, this slowly laying bare of my soul's wounds, this journal of death, this long-drawn and tortuous path, leading to the ocean of countless tears, awakens me again to keen grief. I had used this history as an opiate. While it described my beloved friends, fresh with life and glowing with hope, active assistance on the scene, I was soothed. There will be a more melancholy pleasure in painting the end of all. But the intermediate steps, the climbing the wall raised up between what was and is, while I still looked back nor saw the concealed desert beyond, is a labour past my strength. Time and experience have placed me on a height from which I can comprehend the past as a whole, and in this way I must describe it, bringing forward the leading incidents and disposing light and shade so as to form a picture in whose very darkness there will be harmony. It would be needless to narrate those disastrous occurrences for which a parallel might be found in any slighter visitation of our gigantic calamity. Does the reader wish to hear of the pest houses, where death is the comforter, of the mournful passage of the death cart, of the insensibility of the worthless and the anguish of the loving heart, of harrowing shrieks and silence dire, of the variety of disease, desertion, famine, despair, and death? There are many books which can feed the appetite craving for these things. Let them turn to the accounts of Boccaccio, Defoe, and Browne. The vast annihilation that has swallowed all things, the voiceless solitude of the once busy earth, the lonely state of singleness which hems me in, has deprived even such details of their stinging reality, and mellowing the lurid tints of past anguish with poetic hues, I am able to escape from the mosaic of circumstance, by perceiving and reflecting back the grouping and combined colouring of the past. I had returned from London possessed by the idea, with the intimate feeling that it was my first duty to secure, as well as I was able, the well-being of my family, and then to return and take my post beside Adrian. The events that immediately followed on my arrival at Windsor changed this view of things. The plague was not in London alone, it was everywhere. It came on us, as Ryland had said, like 1,000 packs of wolves howling through the winter night, gaunt and fierce. When once disease was introduced into the rural districts, its effects appeared more horrible, more exigent, and more difficult to cure than in towns. There was a companionship in suffering there, and the neighbours, keeping constant watch on each other, and inspired by the active benevolence of Adrian, succour was afforded, and the path of destruction smoothed. But in the country, among the scattered farmhouses, in lone cottages, in fields and barns, tragedies were acted, harrowing to the soul, unseen, unheard, unnoticed. Medical aid was less easily procured, food was more difficult to obtain, and human beings, unwithheld by shame, for they were unbeheld of their fellows, ventured on deeds of greater wickedness, or gave way more readily to their abject fears. Deeds of heroism also occurred, whose very mention swells the heart and brings tears into the eyes. Such is human nature, that beauty and deformity are often closely linked. In reading history we are chiefly struck by the generosity and self-devotion that follow close on the heels of crime, veiling with supernal flowers the stain of blood. Such acts were not wanting to adorn the grim train that waited on the progress of the plague. The inhabitants of Berkshire and Bucks had been long aware that the plague was in London, in Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, York, in short, in all the more populous towns of England. They were not, however, the less astonished and dismayed when it appeared among themselves. They were impatient and angry in the midst of terror. They would do something to throw off the clinging evil, and while in action they fancied that a remedy was applied. The inhabitants of the smaller towns left their houses, pitched tents in the fields, wandering separate from each other, careless of hunger or the sky's inclemency, while they imagined that they avoided the death-dealing disease. The farmers and cottagers, on the contrary, struck with the fear of solitude, and madly desirous of medical assistance, flocked into the towns. But winter was coming, and with winter hope. In August the plague had appeared in the country of England, and during September it made its ravages. Towards the end of October it dwindled away, and was in some degree replaced by a typhus of hardly less virulence. The autumn was warm and rainy. The infirm and sickly died off. Happy are they! Many young people, flushed with health and prosperity, made pale by wasting malady, became the inhabitants of the grave. The crop had failed. The bad corn and want of foreign wines added vigour to disease. Before Christmas half England was under water. The storms of the last winter were renewed, but the diminished shipping of this year caused us to feel less the tempests of the sea. The flood and storms did more harm to continental Europe than to us, giving, as it were, the last blow to the calamities which destroyed it. In Italy the rivers were unwatched by the diminished peasantry, and like wild beasts from their lair when the hunters and dogs are afar, did Tiber, Arno, and Po rush upon and destroy the fertility of the plains. Whole villages were carried away. Rome and Florence and Pisa were overflowed, and their marble palaces, laid mirrored in tranquil streams, had their foundations shaken by their winter-gifted power. In Germany and Russia the injury was still more momentous. But frost would come at last, and with it a renewal of our lease of earth. Frost would blunt the arrows of pestilence, and enchain the furious elements, and the land would in spring throw off her garment of snow, released from her menace of destruction. It was not until February that the desired signs of winter appeared. For 3 days the snow fell, ice stopped the current of the rivers, and the birds flew out from crackling branches of the frost-whitened trees. On the 4th morning all vanished. A southwest wind brought up rain, the sun came out, and mocking the usual laws of nature, seemed even at this early season to burn with solstitial force. It was no consolation that with the first winds of March the lanes were filled with violets, the fruit trees covered with blossoms, that the corn sprung up and the leaves came out, forced by the unseasonable heat. We feared the balmy air, we feared the cloudless sky, the flower-covered earth, and delightful woods, for we looked on the fabric of the universe no longer as our dwelling, but our tomb, and the fragrant land smelled to the apprehension of fear like a wide churchyard. Pisando la tierra dura, de continuo el hombre está cada paso que da es sobre su sepultura. Yet notwithstanding these disadvantages, winter was breathing time, and we exerted ourselves to make the best of it. Plague might not revive with the summer, but if it did, it should find us prepared. It is a part of man's nature to adapt itself through habit even to pain and sorrow. Pestilence had become a part of our future, our existence. It was to be guarded against like the flooding of rivers, the encroachments of ocean, or the inclemency of the sky. After long suffering and bitter experience, some panacea might be discovered. As it was, all that receive infection died. All, however, were not infected, and it became our part to fix deep the foundations and raise high the barrier between contagion and the sane. To introduce such order as would conduce to the well-being of the survivors, and as would preserve hope and some portion of happiness to those who were spectators of the still renewed tragedy. Adrian had introduced systematic modes of proceeding in the metropolis, which, while they were unable to stop the progress of death, yet prevented other evils, vice and folly, from rendering the awful fate of the hour still more tremendous. I wished to imitate his example, but men are used to move altogether, if they move at all, and I could find no means of leading the inhabitants of scattered towns and villages, who forgot my words as soon as they heard them not, and veered with every baffling wind that might arise from an apparent change of circumstance. I adopted another plan. Those writers who have imagined a reign of peace and happiness on earth have generally described a rural country, where each small township was directed by the elders and wise men. This was the key of my design.